All right, so I am on a very short timeline to make this video, about 1 hour. So we're gonna do a really quick video here. But I really wanted to get this out because this mod that I'm going to show you is super cool, and we're going to use it to explain how Bedrock Breaking works at a level that didn't really explain in the last video. So in the last video, we explained how inheriting block events kind of works, how you can inherit a retraction block event into a piston that is not the same piston that was meant to retract, and then retract that piston through Bedrock, and then basically end up setting the Bedrock block to be air. We explained all of that, but I never really explained too much how we envision how block events work in a machine like this. The reason for that is that it's just kind of hard to explain. It's not super complicated, honestly. It's just kind of not really the sort of thing that's easy to discuss without a good visualization. So Punchster 2 has made a mod called Subtick, and what Subtick does, it's kind of like Carpet. We demonstrated Carpet in the last mod. It allows you to freeze the game. So with Carpet, we can go ahead and we can say power this. If we do a tick freeze, the piston won't extend, and we can do a tick step, and we can see the piston extending for one tick, another tick, and it's finished extending after 3 ticks. And that's a really nice way to visualize how things work at a tick level. But block events, as we probably went over in the last video again, don't occur at a tick level, they occur at a subtick level, I guess you could say. And therefore, in order to step through them nicely and see the correct order of the block events within a single tick, we would need a mod that allows you to expose that, which is what Subtick does. So I'll give you an example of how the mod works, and then we're just going to go ahead and use the Subtick mod to explain Bedrock Breaking with this setup here. This setup is extremely ugly and it's complicated, but it's going to be really easy to understand how it works when we see the visualization of how each block event executes. First off, let's just do a basic demonstration. So we're going to have, I don't know, we'll do something really basic here. We got a piston, we got 2 pistons here, I don't know, and then we'll extend these 2 pistons. So we're going to freeze the game because Subtick is a mod that uses Carpet. It interfaces with the way that Carpet freezes in tick steps, and Subtick provides like more granularity to that feature set. And then we're going to go ahead and power this piston. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do a subtick step. So we're going to do BE step. Must be in tick freeze. All right, so yet again, we're going to place the redstone block, and we're going to do a BE step. Which is the command that's provided, one of a few commands that's provided to us by the Subtick mod. And so what this is going to show is there's this glass outline around this piston, and that indicates that this piston here had a block event scheduled in the block event queue, and that is the next block event to be executed. And so it shows that this piston here, basically in this case, it has started extending. And we can do another step, and as you can see, we have no more block events. So we're finished processing block events. There's nothing more that's been scheduled. And so I've basically just gone ahead and skipped through the remaining few ticks. And now we've scheduled a block event at this piston and a block event at this piston. But we're going to do a B step. And this piston will start to extend, which will make this piston no longer a piston, so to speak. And when we do another block event step, nothing happens. That's because this piston here had a block event scheduled at it by this redstone block. But it didn't get to execute, so the Subtick mod doesn't show us that block event executing because it ends up getting basically like skipped over when it gets to that point in the queue. Alright, so we're going to quickly use this mod to demonstrate a very important concept in Bedrock Breaking, which is the difference between pushing and pulling. Now, in a lot of ways, pushing and pulling are very similar, but understanding a very specific way in which they differ is really crucial to understanding a core concept in a lot of Bedrock Breaking layouts. And I've set up this test in here to basically demonstrate how that works, and what we're going to do is we're going to use the Subtick mod in order to demonstrate it properly. In this setup, we have a pulling sticky piston, which is attached to these blocks here, and then at the end, we have an extended sticky piston with a redstone block above it. This redstone block, when we destroy it, we'll schedule a retraction event for this piston here, and then schedule a retraction event for this piston here. Then this retraction event will execute because it is the first retraction event in the block event queue, and then this retraction event will execute after that. Just to prove the update order of us placing that redstone block or removing it, if we put a redstone block here, you can see that the bottom command block runs first and then the top command block. So in this case, when we remove the redstone block, this piston here will start to retract, and then this piston here will start to retract. All right, so we're going to go ahead and freeze the game, and I will destroy the redstone block. And we're going to go ahead and do some block event steps. So we're going to block event step 1, and so this block event here will execute, and that means that this block here is now a error block, and we just get kind of the block 36 thing going on. It's like a retracting piston. And next, we will execute another block event step, and that means that this piston here is now retracting. And if we continue, you can see there's no more block events in this dimension, so we can go ahead and tick freeze just to see the result of this. And this piston here successfully pulls these blocks back, and this piston here fully retracts. All right, so this system over here is basically the same thing. The only difference is that instead of retracting these blocks, we're going to push them. However, everything else will work the same way. When we destroy this redstone block, this piston here will start to retract, and then this piston here will start to extend because it'll be updated by us removing the redstone block. And this piston here is bud powered, so it'll get powered by this redstone block up here. Again, let's do a tick freeze. And we'll remove the redstone block. And so in theory, if pushing and pulling are exactly the same, this should do the exact same thing as this. So we're going to go ahead and do a block event step. And just as in this one, we're going to execute this block event. This block event was the first one that was queued into the block event queue. And yeah, this piston's going to start retracting, which means that this piston can now push when its block event gets executed. And it's going to tell us that there's no more block events in this dimension. And if we unfreeze the game, we'll find out that this piston here actually didn't extend at all. Now this piston here can extend. If we update it, it'll extend and move these blocks to the side. But there's actually a very important reason why it didn't extend here. And this isn't totally related to block events, but it is kind of related, so I kind of took this opportunity to put this out there. The difference here between these two setups is that this piston here can't physically extend when it gets updated. So if we go back to the initial setup, with this piston here is extended, and we have this piston here, and we'll just pretend this piston is bud powered, it doesn't really matter. Actually, we have to place a bedrock here anyways to replace this redstone block. So with this initial setup here, when we destroy this redstone block, the first thing it does is that it will queue both block events, or at least it'll try to queue the block events. So first off, it'll try and queue this block event here, the retraction block event, and there's nothing preventing this piston from retracting, so this piston will have its retraction block event queued. However, this piston here can't extend right now, because this block event here hasn't actually executed yet. The piston here is still extended, and it's still blocking the extension of this piston, so we can't queue an extension block event here. And that's why when we destroyed the redstone block, this piston here wasn't able to extend. Not because it couldn't extend when it was actually supposed to extend, but that when we broke the redstone block, it didn't even queue the block event, because it recognized that the piston couldn't extend, and the block event doesn't end up in the queue. With this setup over here, a sticky piston can always retract. There's no way to prevent a sticky piston from retracting. So when we destroy this redstone block, first it queues the block event here, but then it's free to queue the block event for this piston retracting as well. Of course, at this point in time, this piston can't retract these blocks. It'll just retract by itself. So what the game thinks is going to happen, this is what the game thinks is going to happen. But as we saw with the Subtick mod, when this retraction block event eventually executes, this block event here executes after this block event has already executed. This piston has started to retract, and therefore it's able to pull these blocks back. So that's why retraction is basically different from extension. It's because when the initial update happens to the piston, when the block event of the retraction or the extension is supposed to be queued, the game does a preliminary check to see if that can physically happen. And with retraction, it always can happen, so it gets added to the queue. But with extension, it can't always happen, so sometimes it doesn't get added to the queue, even though it would be able to push later on in the tick when the queued block event would actually occur. All right. Now let's go over to the setup here, and we're just going to basically use block events to understand how the setup works. This setup is a bit of a unique one. It's going to break this bedrock here. And as we explained previously, it's pretty simple. That's not simple at all. I'm lying to you. As we explained in the previous video, it's not too complicated how everything works once you put the pieces together. We have a headless sticky piston here that's being used to accelerate the movement of this piston here into this piston here's position. We have a headless normal piston here, which is used to destroy this piston. And this is actually where things get kind of important, and this is the reason we're pulling, and I just explained the difference between pulling and pushing. So we have this piston here, which is pulling. This block event here will get scheduled before this piston here is destroyed. So when we pull, we can schedule this pull. But if we were going to push this slime block over, it wouldn't be possible because we would be trying to queue the block event at a point in time when the block event couldn't actually happen, basically. Just like with that set over here. So the reason we're pulling here is because at the time we depower this piston, not at the time where the piston retracts, but at the time where we depower the piston, this piston here still exists. And so we can't move this stuff over. So if we were going to push, the block event wouldn't actually get scheduled. That's a bit of a tangent. This is probably not a super comprehensible video, so sorry about that, but it is what it is. All right, so let's go ahead and understand the setup with block events. It's magical. So we're going to freeze the game, and I'm going to obey the signs because they're very important. So we're going to go ahead and update this observer first, this observer next, and then this observer, and finally this observer over here. Now we can skip a couple ticks because it's just observers getting queued. I've made a severe mistake. All right, so basically the first thing that happens, as we can see with the mod, is that this piston here will start to extend. Now when this redstone block arrives, it will start to power this piston here and this piston here. And in order to determine which one it powers first, we'll actually be able to look at the block events as they occur, but that's a little bit later. The next thing that happens is that this piston starts to extend, and when this piston arrives, it will start to push because it will have a block event scheduled by being updated by its arrival. This redstone block is here, so yeah. We'll step another block event, and so when this glass block arrives, so this piston is the next one to extend, it will update this piston, which is powered by this redstone block, and this piston here will start to push, and will depower this piston. But keep in mind, again, that this won't happen immediately. When this glass block arrives here, it will schedule a block event. So we have like a list of block events, right? We have a list of block events, block event 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And so block event 1 will execute first, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, right? What's important is the order in which they're scheduled. So it doesn't really matter like when this glass block arrives. What matters is that when it arrives, it schedules this piston's extension, and then we have to wait for this piston to actually extend. We have to wait for us to get to that block event. The next block event here is this glass block getting moved over here, and I honestly don't know if that does anything. No, it doesn't. It just updates this piston here when it gets to the other side. When we update this piston, it will start to depower this piston here. But again, it's important to keep in mind, that will only happen when this block event actually executes, not immediately after the glass block arriving. And there's no more block events in the dimension, so we can go ahead and take a step. All right, so we can block event step again. So this redstone block here was the first that arrived, and so it scheduled this piston's extension as the first block event. So naturally, this is the first block event that gets executed, and this redstone block is going to start to move. So because this redstone block is just starting to move, we can now add this piston here, its retraction, as another block event. And that block event will execute on the same tick because the redstone block is starting to move, and depowering is instant, basically, as in it executes on the same tick. Obviously, nothing is instant, as we're seeing here with block events. The next block event is over here. Again, this was the second observer, so it's not really a surprise. And that is this piston starting to extend. So it was powered by this redstone block, and that meant that it had to add an extension block event into the block event queue. And now this piston here will start to extend, and that will now queue a block event, a retraction block event here. Now, keep in mind what we talked about earlier with pistons being able to extend or retract. This piston here can retract because it's an extended piston, it can always retract. If instead we were trying to power a piston right now, say say the piston was over here and we were powering it, this wouldn't schedule a block event, right? Because there's an extended piston down here still. So this can't push, and no block event would be scheduled. But because this is a retracting piston, we can schedule the block event, and that's what we're going to do right now. So because this is executing, it's moving this redstone block, and this right now we are putting a retraction block event for this piston into the queue. We're not going to execute it right now. It's going to get executed a lot later, and we'll see when that happens. But we're able to put it into the queue because it's a retracting piston instead of an extending piston. right? Next block event, again, you can kind of correlate it with the sign here. It's the next thing to happen. It's number 3. And that is this piston starting to move, which will add this piston here, its retraction, as a block event into the queue. All right, so the final thing to happen that's directly caused by our initial set of stuff that we set out is that this piston here will start to extend. And this piston here starting to extend is very important. This is how our bedrock breaking works. So because this piston is starting to extend, this redstone block is going to send out updates around it, or whatever, doesn't really matter. The point is, we're going to schedule a retraction event right at this piston here. This is our extended piston that we're going to use to break the bedrock. Well, it's going to get destroyed, but this is the block event we're going to use to break the bedrock. We just put that block event into the queue because we just extended this redstone block, and so now there's the block event in the queue. But the block event is at the end of the queue. It's not at the start of the queue. So this is going to happen a lot later into the tick. And we've intentionally added a lot of block event delay here, right? So we added this thing here, right? This glass block updated this piston. It didn't directly start to depower this piston, because if it directly started to depower the piston, we would have the retraction block event a lot earlier in the tick. So we've intentionally timed everything, right, with the setup so that this block event here is as late into the tick as we could possibly schedule it, because the very next thing that's going to happen, as we'll see when we tick step, is that we're going to destroy the piston. Now that we've destroyed the piston, because this block event executed, and we were using the fact that a headless normal piston immediately destroys the block in front of it, and that immediately destroys the entire piston, we can no longer schedule the retraction block event. So we specifically timed it so that this redstone block extended just at the right time to update the extended piston while it still existed, thereby generating the retraction block event as late into the tick as possible, but right before we actually destroy the piston and can no longer generate it at all. So we can no longer generate the retraction block event, but we generated it, so it's fine. And it's in the block event queue, and we'll execute it later in the tick. All right, so let's do another tick step. And now, again, it's really important to keep in mind, we only were able to schedule this retraction block event because it's a retracting piston. If it was an extending piston, we wouldn't have been able to schedule it. But now at this point in the tick, as we just went over, this piston here no longer exists. And because it no longer exists, this piston here is fine to retract all of these blocks and move them over. And that includes our normal piston here that we're going to use to break the bedrock. Let's go to the next block event. All right, so this is the headless sticky piston, and we just started retracting the normal piston, and that means that we can now, it's a block 36, so we can now use this piston here, the headless sticky piston, to immediately accelerate the normal piston into this position. And as you can see, it's an old block. I can pick block it. It's now here because we used this block event here, the retraction block event of the headless sticky piston, to accelerate the movement of this normal piston. And keep in mind, that only works when there's a block on the other side. So in this case, there's a block here, and that allows this mechanic to work. And now, I don't know if you remember, but there was a very important block event we talked about earlier, and it just so happens it's the next one in the queue. So if we block that step, you can see that we now have a block event here, a retraction block event. And remember, that was the last block event we scheduled. It had to be, because if it was any earlier in the tick, it would have been before we moved the piston into this position, and it would no longer be able to execute the retraction block event that we need to break the bedrock. But because we just moved this piston in immediately using this block event, we were able to break the bedrock. And it is now air block, and we're doing some interesting block 36 stuff. Yeah, so we've broken the bedrock. And if we block event step a little bit more, you can see there's no more block events, just some like block 36 stuff. And we've broken the bedrock. So if we tick freeze to unfreeze the game, you can see bedrock is broken, we get our piston back, and everything kind of makes it out in the wash. So I hope that kind of makes a bit more bedrock breaking clear. I might make this into a much nicer video in the future. No guarantees on that. I just literally have like 1 hour to make a video right now, and I won't be able to make a video for another 5 weeks. So I figured I might as well make this and upload it and then decide if I wanted to use it later, because I won't be able to actually edit anything for quite a while. So yeah, thanks for watching, and let me know what you thought. I'm sure there's a lot of issues in this video because, again, this is the fastest I have ever gone from no video to a video. So yeah, if you've got any corrections, you have any comments, feel free to put them in the description. The wording was probably not super correct in this video, but I hope I got the point across about how this stuff works, and specifically that tooling can make it really, really easy to understand how this stuff works. This is a really complex setup. not because it needs to be complex, but because I was messing around with different setups and kind of ended up with this. And the way I was able to end up with the setup was by using the tooling. It would have been way harder to figure this out. I would have had to like write out the block event queue on like a piece of paper or something to figure out what was executing, that sort of thing. But thanks to the Subtick mod by Punchster, which you can download in the description, I was able to figure this out and get it working and then discard it later because it's really, really ugly. But yeah, super, super useful mod, and really, really helps to understand Bedrock Breaking in particular. Bedrock Breaking involves a lot of block events and a lot of block event stuff, so it's really useful to be able to see those and visualize them in the game. But yeah, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.